The money wasn't just good, it was too good. $30 an hour for a night shift at a gas station on the edge of nowhere. That kind of pay felt like it came with a catch, though I wasn't in a position to turn it down. As my old car rattled to a stop in the dirt lot of Lone Coyote Gas, that unease I'd tried to ignore all week began clawing at me again. The headlights illuminated a squat, boxy building, its cracked stucco walls painted a dull beige that blended into the surrounding desert. Above the entrance, a faded neon coyote blinked unsteadily, the glowing outline of its howl struggling to stay lit. The entire scene looked like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Behind the building, the land stretched into a vast, empty blackness, broken only by the faint silhouettes of jagged rock formations in the distance. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, the engine ticking as it cooled. It wasn't just the isolation that got to me. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that made you feel like the world had ended, leaving you behind as the only living thing. I checked my phone again out of habit, no signal, of course. Just an empty bar where the reception icon should have been. Sighing, I shoved the phone into my pocket and grabbed my backpack. As I stepped out of the car, the heat hit me like a furnace. Even this late at night, the desert air felt suffocating. It wasn't just the temperature, though. There was something about the air itself, dry and heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the gravel as I walked toward the entrance. I hesitated with my hand on the door, glancing back at my car. For a moment, I considered getting back in, driving away, and pretending this job never existed. But the thought of my brother, Nate, stopped me. Nate was in rehab, and someone had to pay for it. That someone was me. This job, as strange as it sounded when I applied, was my best shot at keeping him there. And Nate needed to stay. He was finally sober after years of spiraling, and I wasn't going to let him lose that progress because I couldn't handle a few nights in the middle of nowhere. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. A bell jingled above me, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet. The air inside was slightly cooler, though not by much. The faint scent of cleaning supplies and stale coffee mingled with something else I couldn't quite place, a metallic tang that lingered at the back of my throat. The gas station was exactly what you'd expect, a small, cluttered space with linoleum floors worn thin in places, shelves stocked with dusty snacks, and a coffee machine in the corner that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Behind the counter sat an old register, a stack of scratch-off tickets, and a boombox with a cracked speaker. It all felt outdated, like the place had been frozen in time decades ago. "You must be Darren," a voice called from the back, rough and gravelly. I turned to see a man emerging from a door marked employees only. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with silver hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. His face was deeply lined, the kind of face that told you he'd spent most of his life squinting into the sun. His wrists gleamed with turquoise bracelets, and his eyes, dark and sharp, studied me with a weight that made me uncomfortable. "Yeah, that's me," I said, extending a hand. "You're Hank." "Owner, manager, and janitor," he said with a faint smile, shaking my hand. His grip was strong but dry. "Welcome to Lone Coyote. Not much to it, but it gets the job done." "Thanks for the opportunity," I said, forcing a polite tone. "Not many places are paying this well these days." Hank nodded but didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked me over, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gestured for me to follow him behind the counter. "Let me show you how things work." He started with the basics, the register, the gas pump controls, the security cameras. It all seemed straightforward enough. But then Hank's tone shifted, and his posture stiffened slightly. "There are a few rules you'll need to follow," he said, his voice quieter now. "These aren't normal rules, Darren. They're important." I nodded, though his words put me on edge. "Okay. What are they?" "First rule," he said, leaning against the counter. "If someone comes in with yellow eyes, don't sell them anything. No jerky, no Slim Jims, no tobacco. Nothing." "Yellow eyes," I repeated, frowning. "Like jaundice or something?" "You'll know it when you see it," Hank said flatly. His expression didn't change. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he moved on. "Second rule, If you see black fluid leaking from any of the pumps, lock the doors and play track 3 on the boombox. Don't stop it until the leaking stops. What kind of fluid? Like oil? Hank shook his head. Not oil, he said firmly. Just remember, track 3. My unease deepened. And the third rule? I asked. Never answer the payphone, Hank said, nodding toward the old phone mounted on the wall near the bathrooms. I glanced at it, noting the layer of dust covering the receiver. Does it even work? It shouldn't, Hank replied. But if it rings, don't answer. Ever. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. Anything else I should know? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. That's it, Hank said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, between 2 and 4 in the morning, things can get strange. Just stick to the rules, and you'll be fine. Strange how? I asked, but Hank didn't answer. Instead, he clapped a hand on my shoulder and walked toward the door. Good luck, he said over his shoulder, stepping outside. The bell jingled as the door swung shut behind him. A moment later, his truck's headlights swept across the lot, and then he was gone, leaving me alone. The first few hours were uneventful. I wiped down the counter, reorganized the candy shelf, and tried to familiarize myself with the register. A couple of customers came and went, a tired-looking trucker filling up his tank and a young woman grabbing a soda for the road. They barely said a word to me, and I was fine with that. But as the night wore on, the air seemed to change. The silence outside felt heavier, like the desert itself was watching. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows that made the cramped space feel even smaller. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until my shift was over. At 1:30, the bell jingled again. A man stepped inside, his broad frame nearly filling the doorway. He had tattooed arms and a shaved head, and he moved with a kind of deliberate confidence that made my skin crawl. He wandered over to the fridge, grabbing a Red Bull, then approached the counter with a lighter in his other hand. Pump 4, he said, sliding a couple of 20s across the counter. As I rang him up, I caught a whiff of something strange, like burnt fur and something metallic. I tried to ignore it, but when I glanced at his shadow on the wall, my stomach turned. It didn't look right. It was too long, its edges blurred, and for a split second, I thought I saw horns sprouting from his head. I blinked, and it was gone. First night? He asked, his gravelly voice breaking the silence. Yeah, I said quickly, forcing a polite smile. He pocketed his change and walked out without another word. I watched him pump his gas, my unease growing as he moved with stiff, almost mechanical movements. When he drove away, I stayed by the window for a while, staring out at the empty lot. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., the payphone rang. The sharp, mechanical ring of the payphone cut through the silence, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the pen I was using to doodle on a scrap of receipt paper. My head snapped toward the sound. The phone sat in its dusty little corner near the bathrooms, as unremarkable as it had been when Hank first showed me around. The old receiver hung on its cradle, the cord curled like a snake coiled to strike. It rang again, loud and insistent, each note digging under my skin. Hank's warning echoed in my mind. Never answer the payphone. For a moment, I just stared at it, frozen. My feet felt like they were glued to the linoleum floor, and my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rational part of my brain told me to ignore it, to stay put behind the counter where I was safe. But curiosity has a way of overriding common sense, and I found myself taking a hesitant step forward. Then another. The phone rang a third time. I stopped a few feet away, staring down at it like it was a living thing. Dust coated the faded blue plastic, and the buttons were worn smooth from years of use or decades of disuse. It shouldn't have been working. Hank made that clear. Yet here it was, buzzing like an angry hornet, demanding attention. My hand twitched toward the receiver before I caught myself. What the hell was I doing? Hank's voice thundered in my head again. Never answer the payphone. It rang a fourth time, louder than before, as if it was challenging me. I took a shaky step back, my breath catching in my throat. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on me like the weight of the entire desert. I waited, half expecting it to start up again, but it didn't. After a moment, the tension ebbed, though the unease in my chest lingered like a bad aftertaste. Shaking my head, I turned and walked back to the counter, forcing myself to focus on the mundane. I'd barely sat down when something moved at the edge of my vision. My head snapped toward the glass doors, heart racing. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the fluorescent lights playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again, a dark shape gliding past the pumps, too large to be a stray dog or a coyote. It moved unnaturally, its gait uneven and jerky, as if it wasn't used to walking on four legs. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the thing darted behind one of the pumps before I could get a clear look. My pulse quickened, the air suddenly feeling too thick. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with an explanation. A big dog. Maybe a deer. But deep down, I knew neither of those things felt right. Then the lights above pump 4 flickered, casting long, warped shadows across the concrete. My chest tightened as a faint sound reached my ears, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the glass. It wasn't loud, but it carried an unnatural resonance, like it wasn't meant to be heard by human ears. I wanted to look away, to retreat to the safety of the booth, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the pump. For a moment, nothing happened. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. Then the growling stopped, replaced by a wet, sloshing noise that sent shivers down my spine. I leaned forward, squinting through the glass. That's when I saw it. A dark, viscous liquid was seeping from the base of pump 4, pooling on the concrete. It wasn't gas. Gasoline has a distinct color, a shimmer in the light. This was different, thicker, blacker, almost alive. It spread slowly, tendrils of it snaking outward as if searching for something. Hank's second rule slammed into my mind. If the pumps leak black fluid, lock the doors and play track 3. I snapped into action, fumbling for the panel of switches behind the counter. My hands shook as I hit the lock button, hearing the heavy thunk of the doors securing themselves. Then I turned to the boombox, my heart racing as I searched for the cassette tape Hank had pointed out earlier. It was unlabeled, the plastic case yellowed with age. Track 3, I muttered under my breath, yanking the tape out of its case and jamming it into the player. My fingers trembled as I fast-forwarded, the whir of the spools filling the quiet. When I finally stopped and hit play, the sound that emerged from the speakers wasn't music. It was a chant. The voice was deep and raspy, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It had a rhythm to it, slow and deliberate, each word carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. Beneath the voice, there was another sound, a soft, scraping noise, like bone being dragged across stone. I stepped back, my eyes darting between the boombox and the window. Outside, the black fluid was still spreading, but now it seemed to react to the sound. The tendrils paused, hesitated, then began retracting, pulling back toward the pump in slow, jerky movements. It was like watching a snake retreat into its hole. The chant continued, growing louder and more urgent. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, the words reverberating through my very bones. Outside, the fluid rose upward, defying gravity as it disappeared back into the seams of the pump. Then, as suddenly as it started, the leak stopped. The chant faded into silence. I stood there, frozen, my ears ringing from the absence of sound. For a long moment, I didn't move. The lights above the pumps flickered again, then steadied. The darkness seemed to lift slightly, though the unease in my chest remained. Slowly, I reached out and ejected the tape, sliding it back into its case with shaking hands. "What the hell is this place?" I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. The rest of the night passed in a haze of hypervigilance. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerators, the creak of the building settling, set my nerves on edge. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the minutes to pass faster. By the time the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, I was practically counting down the seconds until Hank arrived. When his truck finally pulled into the lot, I nearly ran to unlock the doors. He stepped inside, his expression calm and unreadable as he looked me over. "How was your first night?" he asked, his tone casual. "Quiet," I lied, forcing a smile. Hank nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Good. Till gets counted at shift change. You can head out once we're done. As he counted the register, I debated whether to tell him about the payphone, the black fluid, or the strange shape I'd seen. But something about his demeanor stopped me. It was like he already knew. Instead, I pulled out the Polaroid I'd found while tidying up earlier. The photograph showed a much younger Hank standing next to something that sent chills down my spine, a tall, thin figure with distorted features, its face obscured. Written at the bottom in faded blue ink were the words, "Feeding time, 1999. "What's this?" I asked, holding it. Hank's expression didn't change, but I noticed his hand hesitate as he took the photo. "Old Halloween picture," he said, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "Just a joke." I wanted to press him further, but the look in his eyes warned me not to. "See you tonight," he said as I headed for the door. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the desert. As I climbed into my car, I glanced back at the gas station. For a moment, I thought I saw something standing near pump 4, a tall, thin figure watching me. The desert stretched before me in its vast emptiness, the rising sun brushing the red rock formations with muted light. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white against the faded leather. The gas station receded in the rearview mirror, but the unease lingered, coiled tight in my chest. Whatever I thought I saw near pump 4, the tall, thin figure, was gone now, just a trick of the light, maybe. That's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I knew better. The day passed in a blur of restless sleep and gnawing questions. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same things: the black fluid snaking across the concrete, the distorted shadow of the trucker, the Polaroid with its cryptic caption. And worst of all, the phone, ringing endlessly in my dreams, the sound slicing through the silence until I bolted awake, heart hammering. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned that deep, bruised purple, I found myself pulling into the gas station again. Part of me wanted to turn around, to drive back home and never return. But the other part, the part that needed to keep Nate in rehab, that needed the money, forced my hand. 7 nights. That was all I had to get through. The bell jingled as I stepped inside, the familiarity of the sound doing little to calm my nerves. Hank was waiting for me behind the counter, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Good to see you back," he said, his voice calm. "Too calm." "Yeah," I muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Wouldn't miss it." He handed me the keys without a word and headed for the door. Just as he was about to leave, he turned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Remember the rules," he said. "I haven't forgotten," I replied. Hank nodded, satisfied, and disappeared into the night. The first hour passed uneventfully. I restocked the shelves, swept the floor, and tried to focus on anything but the strange events of the night before. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept drifting back to the phone and the black fluid. What was it? Why did the chant make it retreat? And what did Hank mean when he called it protection? At around 10:30, I decided to check the storage room. Hank hadn't shown me much of it during the tour, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to familiarize myself with the place. The room was small and cramped, filled with dusty boxes and shelves cluttered with cleaning supplies. At first glance, it seemed normal enough. But then my eyes caught something odd. In the far corner, propped against the wall, was a clay figurine about the size of a basketball. It was shaped like a coyote, its surface etched with symbols that looked ancient, almost primal. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped closer, my gaze drawn to the intricate carvings. They didn't look like decorations. They looked like warnings. As I reached out to touch it, a sound stopped me in my tracks. The payphone was ringing again. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, about staying in the storage room where I couldn't see it. But something pulled me back to the main area of the station. The phone continued to ring, each shrill note more insistent than the last. I approached it cautiously, my pulse pounding in my ears. The receiver seemed to vibrate slightly with each ring, as if it was alive. My hand hovered over it, trembling. Hank's warning screamed in my head, "Never answer the payphone." But curiosity gnawed at me, relentless and overpowering. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed the receiver and pressed it to my ear. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. For a moment, there was nothing but static, a harsh, grating sound that made my teeth ache. Then, through the interference, I heard a voice. It was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. "They're using you," the voice said, its tone urgent. It sounded like an older woman, her words garbled but clear enough to understand. "The pumps aren't for gas." "What?" I asked, my throat dry. "Who is this?" The static grew louder, rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore. Then the voice returned, sharper this time. "Ask Hank about his wife." "What about his wife?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the receiver. "Who are you?" The line went dead. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, my mind racing. What did she mean, the pumps aren't for gas? And why would I ask Hank about his wife? I slammed the receiver back onto the cradle, my hands trembling. As I turned away, the lights above the pumps flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the lot. One of the shadows seemed to move, slithering along the ground like spilled oil. I blinked, and it was gone. The rest of the night passed in a haze of paranoia. Every noise, the hum of the refrigerators, the creak of the building settling, set me on edge. I couldn't stop glancing at the payphone, half expecting it to ring again. But it stayed silent, its presence looming like a threat. At around 3 a.m., I noticed something strange. The black fluid was back, but this time it wasn't leaking from the pumps. It was pooling at the base of the storage room door, seeping out in slow, deliberate movements. My stomach twisted as I realized it was spreading toward me. I grabbed the boombox, fumbling with the cassette tape as I tried to fast forward to track 3. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the tape, the plastic clattering against the floor. Cursing under my breath, I scrambled to pick it up, shoving it back into the player. As the chant began to play, the fluid reacted instantly, recoiling as if in pain. It retreated back under the door, but this time, it didn't stop there. I watched in horror as it climbed upward, sliding along the seams of the wall until it vanished into the cracks. The chant faded into silence, leaving me alone with the pounding of my heart. By the time dawn arrived, I was running on pure adrenaline. When Hank's truck pulled into the lot, I met him at the door, my face pale and my hands still trembling. "How was it?" he asked, his tone calm as always. "Fine," I lied, though the word tasted bitter on my tongue. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You're doing good," he said finally. "Better than the others." "The others?" I asked, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he handed me an envelope with my first bonus, 2 crisp $50 bills. It felt like a bribe, but I pocketed it anyway. As I left, I glanced back at the station one last time. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the lot. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing near pump 4, a tall, thin figure with glowing eyes. But when I blinked, it was gone. The image of the figure near pump 4 lingered in my mind long after I left the station that morning. Even as the desert receded in the rearview mirror, and the sun climbed higher into the sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me. Not a person, not a shadow, something else entirely. Something wrong. Back home, I tried to sleep, but it was useless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black fluid creeping toward me, the distorted shadows, the payphone ringing with its impossible voice. And above it all, Hank's calm, almost dismissive tone, "You're doing good. Better than the others." What did that mean? How many others had come before me? And what had happened to them? I spent most of the day pacing, replaying everything in my head. The woman's voice on the phone haunted me the most. "Ask Hank about his wife." The words echoed like a warning, or maybe a clue. I couldn't decide if it was meant to help me or lead me further into whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. By the time the sun began to set, I felt like I was unraveling. But I still went back. The thought of not showing up crossed my mind a dozen times, but every time, I pictured Nate. If I quit now, I'd lose the paycheck I needed to keep him in rehab. So I stuffed my fear down deep, climbed into my car, and drove back to Lone Coyote Gas. When I arrived, Hank's truck was already parked out front. The neon coyote on the sign flickered weakly, the outline of its howl sputtering in and out of existence. As I stepped out of the car, the air felt different, heavier, somehow, like it was charged with something I couldn't see. Hank met me at the door, his expression unreadable as always. "You're early," he said, his voice calm. "Figured I'd get a head start," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Hank nodded, stepping aside to let me in. The station looked the same as ever, worn linoleum floors, dusty shelves, the faint hum of the refrigerators. But something about it felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath. As Hank handed me the keys, I decided to ask. "Hank," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what happened to your wife?" His hand froze mid-motion, just for a split second, but it was enough. He recovered quickly, handing me the keys without a word. "You've got a long night ahead of you," he said, ignoring my question. "Yeah," I muttered, watching as he walked out the door and into the night. Once he was gone, the silence descended like a weight. I busied myself with the usual tasks, restocking shelves, wiping down counters, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. The woman's voice, the Polaroid, the black fluid, it all swirled together, forming a picture I couldn't quite make sense of. The hours dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. By midnight, the unease had settled into my bones, making every sound seem louder, every shadow feel darker. I found myself glancing at the payphone every few minutes, half expecting it to ring again. But it stayed silent. At 2:17 a.m., everything changed. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The hum of the refrigerators died, plunging the station into a silence so deep it felt suffocating. My heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl, coming from somewhere outside. It wasn't the growl of an animal, it was deeper, more resonant, like it came from something much larger. My flashlight's beam darted to the windows, but all I could see was the reflection of my own pale, terrified face. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the back of the station, near the storage room. My first instinct was to lock myself in the booth and call for help, but then I remembered Hank's words, "The tribal police are 40 minutes out. Don't panic. Don't panic." Easy for him to say. I crept toward the storage room, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The door was ajar, a thin sliver of darkness stretching into the main room. My mouth went dry as I reached out, pushing it open wider. The beam of light swept over the shelves, the boxes, the clay figurine, and then stopped. The black fluid was back. It was pooling at the base of the clay coyote, spreading outward in slow, deliberate movements. My stomach twisted as I watched it climb the figurine's surface, the dark tendrils curling around the etched symbols. The growling grew louder, resonating from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The chant. I needed the chant. Rushing to the counter, I grabbed the boombox and fumbled for the cassette tape. My hands were shaking so badly that it slipped from my grip, clattering to the floor. I snatched it up, shoving it into the player and fast-forwarding to track 3. As the chant began to play, the fluid reacted violently, recoiling from the figurine and retreating back into the seams of the walls. The growling stopped, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. But this time, the chant didn't feel like enough. The fluid had returned twice now, stronger each time. It wasn't going to stop. I ejected the tape, my mind racing. The pumps aren't for gas. The woman's words echoed in my head. What did she mean? What was this place really for? My eyes fell on the Polaroid Hank had taken from me the morning before. The words written at the bottom came back with startling clarity. Feeding time. Feeding what? I thought about the figures I'd seen, the shadows that didn't move right, the strange, twisted shapes lurking at the edges of the light. And then it hit me. The pumps weren't dispensing gas, they were taking something. Life, maybe. Energy. Soul. Whatever it was, the station was feeding it to something ancient, something hungry. And I was next. The realization came like a punch to the gut. That's why Hank had hired me. That's why he'd been so calm, so unconcerned. He wasn't just running a gas station, he was maintaining a feeding ground. And now, it was my turn to be offered up. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I grabbed the clay figurine from the storage room, the weight of it surprising me. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to pulse under my touch, almost as if it was alive. If this thing was part of the station's power, then I was going to destroy it. Fuel. I needed fuel. Rushing to the pumps, I grabbed a gas can from the storage shed and filled it to the brim. My hands moved on autopilot, my mind racing with fear and determination. Once the can was full, I poured the gas over the figurine, the sharp scent burning my nostrils. As I struck the match, the growling returned, louder and more furious than before. The shadows outside shifted and writhed, pressing against the glass like they were trying to get in. I lit the figurine, the flames roaring to life as they consumed the clay. The effect was immediate. The shadows screamed, a sound so piercing and unnatural that I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears. The glass windows shattered, the pieces raining down like shards of ice. But the shadows didn't come closer. Instead, they began to dissolve, their forms unraveling into tendrils of smoke that disappeared into the night. When it was over, the station was silent. The figurine was nothing but ash, its symbols charred and broken. I stood there, trembling, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. I didn't wait for Hank to show up. I didn't even lock the doors. I climbed into my car and drove, the station disappearing in the rearview mirror.